Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Kim Samuel. I will tell you all about Kim in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that focuses on what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the conviction we show others. And when you do it as a leader, as you will definitely discover that Kim Samuel is, you do it to bring people together for common cause. Kim Samuel, it is an honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hello, John. I'm a big fan of the show already, and just really happy to be here today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I want to tell everybody about you. You're an activist, educator, movement builder. I love that, movement builder. You founder of the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness. You're an academic lecturer at little schools like Oxford, Harvard, and McGill, which I believe is your alma mater. And you're a visiting scholar at the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. And you've been a first ever Fulbright scholarship, the first ever Canadian to hold the Fulbright scholarship. And you live in Toronto. Your new book, which we're going to talk about, is On Belonging, Finding Connection in an Age of Isolation. Kim Samuel, it is a pleasure to have you, sir.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Great. I was all set to ask you a first question until I went to your website, which is kimsamuel.com, and we'll put that in the notes. And you have a statement that says right up front, right to belong. And I go, oh wow. And then I'm going to read here, belonging is beloved community, rooted in place, a feeling of ownership and shared outcome, and a sense of shared mission. That says it all. So see ya. So
Bye, John. Have a great day.
No, what a great interview. So I'm just going to ask you my question anyway. So what does belonging really mean one-on-one? This is a wonderful, eloquent statement. But to you, what does it mean, Kim? And why did you anchor your work in this? So,
in one sentence, belonging means feeling at home wherever you are.
Great. You can't do. Okay, this is going to be a real short interview here. No, kidding. So, and the book is on belonging. And so what motivated you to write an entire book about it other than me being dismissive?
Well, I got the idea to write a book about it after having seen it firsthand, and in particular in the case of my late father, who in 1997 had an out-of-the-blue brain injury. He was in a coma for 3 months, and he woke up very, very slowly. And then I got to see that even though he had a lot of disabilities, he was so happy to be here. We were so happy that we had him. It wasn't about that. It was about this feeling of kind of fading into the mist of your own life. People were treating him differently. They were treating him as kind of other or less than. And then I noticed that systems were treating him the same way. For example, when it was time for him to go to a rehabilitation hospital at the age of 65, he was told that he was not a candidate because he had reached his sundown years. And I know. And that a nursing home would pay for that. So would pay money for a nursing home, but not for rehabilitation. So that's really what started me on the journey. And then looking to most every other part of my life and work, which is how to eradicate poverty, how to redress climate change, and really just in whatever I'm doing, how to be more caring to one another and to ourselves is at the heart of that. And it just kind of was like a spark for me that in all these different things that I've been working on over a many decades career at that point, this issue of belonging, not belonging was at the heart of it. And that's what motivated me to do something about it and try a book.
That's wonderful. And you also draw a distinction that struck me, and perhaps it came from your father's experience of being sort of marginalized, I will say, merely because of age. But you say there's a difference between social isolation and loneliness. What is that, Kim?
Right. Okay. Loneliness, interesting enough, is a much newer concept, only several hundred years old. And that's something to think about is how is it that as people want to be more and more independent, that can sometimes land us in places where if we're not careful, we feel very alone. So loneliness is a subjective feeling, and I'm certainly not dismissing it. And I think it goes hand in hand with isolation. The difference with social isolation, as I see it, is that that's an experience that can involve being alone, or it can involve being in a huge crowd of people. And it's that feeling that I don't belong. I'm not worthy of that. I'm not feeling that I'm in any circles of concern. And isolation can happen to an individual or to a group of individuals, because this also brings in lack of agency, lack of choice, lack of voice, that feeling that we're not able to make decisions for ourselves. Someone else is doing it. And I think that the two of them combined are pretty awful. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say neither are really good here.
No.
And it was interesting that when I say social isolation, I think of more of physical proximity to other human beings. But then you've introduced a different element, is the subject, and my word would be lack of self-esteem. That erodes too. It comes in and makes us feel more lonely or apart from others. Is that true, Kim?
Well, I think that everyone can kind of answer that for themselves, but I find that a lack of self-esteem and not believing in yourself isn't only from the individual. It's also the way that individual is perceived or treated by society, and the reinforcing messages that we can get, and that we all need to be way more aware of what messages we're sending, even if we don't mean to.
Well, we certainly do. A number of my colleagues, women colleagues, focus on the marginalization of women in the workplace, which, and as you would know, 1,000 times worse than I would know, and that's key to that. And I'm guessing that and contributes to this form of loneliness and isolation, does it not, Kim? So yeah.
Yes, and when you gave the example of women, John, and that we look at who lost more jobs, who got set back farther, and so on and so forth through COVID, and COVID continues, it's women. So where I come into that is to say, okay, we can accept that. There's proof about that. And we could also look at other groups that tend to be systematically put down. Example, people with disabilities in the workplace. There's still a lot of work to be done there. People of color, newly arrived citizens to your country, my country, Canada, and others, is that it seems to be that where the gap already exists, or picture cracks in the pavement, those are the cracks that are going to get filled up first with isolation. Yeah.
You are an internationalist, I will say. I know you're a Canadian national, but you have an interesting story, and it involves Nelson Mandela, who tell us the story about meeting him and how he changed your perception of what you do. So
yeah. Well, I was very lucky because I got to meet Nelson Mandela first and foremost. And then something amazing happened for me in that conversation. This was in New York City in May 2002. My dad, Ernie Samuel, had died 2 years earlier, and I had gotten to know Gracia Machel, known for many great accomplishments on her own, and she was the wife of Nelson Mandela, and I knew her a bit. So when I saw her, the first thing she asked me was, "How are you doing since your daddy died?" That's how she put it. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I remember that it was along the lines of I missed him every single day. And then I was realizing that I was meeting Nelson Mandela, and of course I was thinking about social isolation. And I told Gracia, because of my father's experience, that just about everything I was doing was focused on social isolation and how to move past this. And then I looked to Nelson Mandela and I said, you're Nelson Mandela right now. Of course, you would know all about isolation. And he said to me, no, I've never been isolated. And I don't know, mentally took 5 steps backwards. And I thought, I've spoken for 1 second and I've blown it. But anyway, that was true, what I was thinking. And then I said, not even in Robben Island, whereas, Nelson Mandela was in solitary for 19 years out of 27 years that he spent in prison. Even in Robben Island, he said no, because in Robben Island, we were all brothers working together with a common purpose. I was never alone. And then he went on to say, I have seen isolation. I've seen it, a child in a village with AIDS who no one will love or care for or feed. And then I have seen isolation. It is very bad. And in that moment, a couple of things. One, no fireworks, no shooting stars, just this quiet affirmation inside myself. Okay, well, this is what I'll be working on for the rest of my life. Because he'd shown by the perfect example of how you can be physically cut off and not have your freedom and still be connected through this sense of purpose.
No, that's extraordinary. And as you were telling this story, it echoed to me because the word that came to me was when I think of Nelson Mandela on that island with his fellow ANC members and other organizations as well, was, for lack of a better word, they had a community. I mean, none of them wanted to be there, but it was a community. And that's the heart of your sense of belonging, is it not, Kim? So
exactly. And I've been asked previously about why do I use belonging instead of just say community automatically? Well, the reason that I do that is because if there's a community for some, but others are left out, then that's not a community.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love the concept of belonging. It's a verb it's not a gerund. Well, it can be a verb, but belonging is the gerund. And it has a feeling of, quote, connectedness to it. And you are so correct. It is innate within us. And I see the echoes in my work with grace, that desire to be more connected with others and how we exert that. And so you're terribly right on, or exactly right on with this. And so it's very powerful. Now, in your book, on belonging, you have some key lessons for the workplace. Do you want to share them with us, Kim? So
yes, well, I would say more than lessons, they're insights and suggestions, because again, if it's your workplace, you'll know exactly what needs to be done. Well, now we're at a stage in COVID where people generally have the option of going back to office work or working in offices, or working from home, or a hybrid somewhere in between. My remarks are really directed to being in an office environment, but there's also just as big a challenge if you're remote. And it is to start listening, to listen much better to what your coworkers, whether you're the designated boss or wherever you are, because again, in a belonging community, people can have different roles, but every role is equally important. So you need to listen a lot better and not simply rely on, the policies, or if it's DEI or ESG or so on and so on. You need to see, do those policies align with how people are experiencing that place every day? Then you look around and see who's not here that should be here. So if you stand for diversity, which I hope any business I'm talking about does, then you can't just say it. You need to actually look around and make sure, how diverse is your environment, and is this an environment of acceptance? If you have new people coming in, then onboarding usually can be your first week, which is, it's a lot of paperwork. Maybe it's your first day. I think onboarding should go on for at least 2 weeks. I really do, so that people feel extremely comfortable. And then if that organization is doing these things, and an example would be, if the organization has a board of directors, are you actively putting people with disabilities on the board? There's an initiative called the Valuable 500 that does that. So then you're doing all these things. I'm only talking about what you're doing inside your organization. Then take it all outside. But don't just look at what's happening outside and say, good enough, great corporate communications. You have to be living it on the inside too.
Great. And I think the part of the listening, though, also, and when you're talking about onboarding and diversity, I mean, that's the first step. That what we really need is inclusion, and that's where belonging comes in, does it not, Kim? So
yes, absolutely, and it comes in as true inclusion, and by that I mean, and I'll use a business example. So you and I could bring someone into the room and give them a seat, literally at the table. That's not inclusion. It's a good, are they included? Are they listened to? Are they permitted to speak in their own language? Are they able to draw on their own experiences? Are you really listening? Or are you just paying lip service? That's real inclusion.
no, that's wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad you clarified seat at the table is more than, well, it gets back to what you said, listening. Are they listening, and do they have a voice? And another term for that would be, a corollary to that would be the psychological safety. Do I feel that I belong here? Absolutely.
That's where it starts. There has to be a safe space, and I believe that if a safe space is, and you just said it, it's not only the physical space, it's that feeling of that you are safe to show up as yourself, and I believe in a safe space, and that way must be a caring space too.
Oh, a caring space. That's well. That gets to as we talked about the topic of loneliness and then isolation. What practical steps might we, as say individuals, if we're seeking a greater sense of belonging? Mm-hmm. What might we do, Kim?
Well, if you don't mind, John, I'm going to expand a little on the question in my answer, which is what can we do for ourselves and what can we do for others?
Perfect. Okay. Beautiful.
Okay. I thought that would resonate. This is all reciprocal, and reciprocal doesn't mean, well, Kim will do this for John, and then John has to think of something to do with Kim. No, for Kim. It's about where there's a need, you see it. And I believe that we all see more than we sometimes want to acknowledge that we see. And we shouldn't say, oh, I didn't know. Once you know that, whatever that is, then I think you have a responsibility in community to do something about it. So first, it's reciprocal. Some people have a lot more natural resilience than others. Yeah. And some people are better at connecting with one another than others. And that can vary within an individual through their whole life course. Some people have more support. And I believe that we should all have a lot of support around us. Some people don't feel that they have any support. So one of the things is simply to be really aware of where are you in all this at any given time, and what about the people that you encounter. So for example, if there's an event in your community, then and it's a community picnic, then have that, and that's great. And neighbors often don't meet each other. This is important, but then be aware of who didn't turn up that day that's in your community too, who may not feel enough that they can be part of it. And in my book, I actually worked really hard not to tell people what to do, and I'll tell you why. And I got this idea from a wonderful writer and thinker, and first identifies himself as a farmer, Wendell Berry, and whom I got to interview. But I also asked him for advice. Do you have any advice for me? And he said, "Don't be prescriptive." And I thought that was really important. And so I don't say, here's 10 things you can do, but the book is full of stories about people who have not only created a lot of belonging for others, but also done it in such a way that they're able to then play it forward from there. And I guess one last thing on this question is just go one step farther. Whatever you're doing, go one step farther. Whatever you you may be needing tell someone. That's one step farther. A lot of people, even when they do see, they may not guess, or they may feel bad to say, do you need my help? No, just show up and give it.
That's fine. And I liked your interview with Wendell Berry, and being a writer, a poet, as it's what he told you is essentially what artists do is show, don't tell.
Exactly.
But your stories illustrate and bring it to life. So, but there is something specific then. So, is belonging then about responsibilities to others? You talked about this, and I like your picnic idea. So who's not here and why? So tell me about this responsibility to others, how it relates to belonging. So
it's at the heart of it. When I talk about the right to belong, and when I envision it, the idea isn't to create a new declaration in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. One, because there's not an appetite for that, but two, and I want to pass along some other great advice I got, which goes to why listening is so important, by a friend of mine called Ken Roth. And Ken, for the last 3 decades, has been the executive director of Human Rights Watch. Mm-hmm. And when I asked him about this concept of the right to belong, back in over a cup of tea in 2018, he said, Kim, don't look at this as a new human right. Look at this as a tool that can be used to lift up a whole constellation of neglected rights. And I said, okay, Ken, which one should I start with? And he said, pick any of them. So that's the rights part. And it's really important, and that we look at how various rights and ones that have come in immediately post World War II. For example, no one was envisioning indigenous people and others that were just left out of the right. of the certain world order at that time. That's important. But so the rights part is important as a vehicle. So are the laws, but enforcement is the key. The real thing is community. And that's where responsibilities come in. And so it's not an either or, but what I want to see is and community, I'm not defining a size of a community for you. And we all identify in many different communities, including geographically where we live, is that the community's voice and the responsibility taken there for one another, and around issues around the land, for example, around education, around how it's really an injustice for people to be living in poverty anywhere. That's the heart of the right to belong. And maybe it's about creating more opportunities for people whose voices should be at the center of policy and other dialogues to be there.
That's a powerful statement. And as you were speaking, a thought came to mind is, you don't want to be prescriptive, but unfortunately, I live by prescriptives, so I'm always digging for them. But actually, when you were talking about this, not being prescriptive, but if I'm belonging and I'm part of a community, it makes me easy. It's easier for me, to reach out and help others, or be of service to others, or make myself available to others. Do you see that, Kim?
Oh, yes, but that comes from a heart place, not a prescriptive place. And,
right.
And the reason that one, because Wendell Berry gave me that advice, so I thought that advice should be very well considered. But also, I felt like if I told people, oh, here's 10 things that you can do, well, I'm taking away the power of the imagination to about what that is. And I think that's really important too.
No, and there's another element to that. When we are too prescriptive, then it becomes a should rather than a could, and then don't tell, and then what's easily defaults into don't tell me what to do. So discover for yourself. So I have this little thing I'm experimenting with, a culture of service, and it's just making yourself more available to others, and you define it for yourself. So is that in line with the sense of belonging, Kim? So
well, it is, but also I give through, for example, in the book, I give a lot of, I believe so much in the power of storytelling. I bet you do too. Yeah, and I give story after story that shows how this works in practice. But what I stop short of doing is telling somebody how they should show up in community.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just going to a thought of you because you're teaching in some pretty prestigious place. Is teaching for you generative? So
Oh, well, yeah. Teaching, I'll tell you a little story. When I was 9 years old, I was at an all girls school, and all of the teachers were nuns. It was,
I was going to say,
but I loved the nuns, and I loved that the nuns were teachers. And I went home and I told my mom and dad that when I grew up, I was going to become a nun and a teacher, because it didn't occur to me that they didn't go hand in hand.
yeah.
Well, the nun part didn't really pan out, but the teacher part did, but not for many decades to come. And when I was about to go to McGill University, where I got to create this course right in my subject, which was incredible, I was really pragmatic at the time. I was thinking, all right, then I'm going to create a course and show that social isolation, lack of belonging, social connectedness, and all of this really belongs in dialogues about international development, policy, about education, and so forth. And that's what I'm going to do. And if I can do that successfully, then I'm hoping that educators around the world, not only at the college level, only at post-secondary, can make this course their own, and we can create a whole new field of study, beginning with the classroom itself that has an ethos of a caring classroom. Okay, that is still my dream, John. But this is what happened when I went to McGill to begin teaching. It was this existential experience that me at 9 years old, with funny braids that I did myself, was standing right outside my body, holding my hand, saying, "We made it." That's what it felt like. Now, the first few weeks of teaching, I was really scared, and because I just really wanted to do a good job, and it was a brand new thing. And so I wouldn't say this of the first 3 weeks, but from 3 weeks on, it hit me at 3 weeks. This is my true vocation. I was always supposed to be a teacher, and it doesn't have to be in a classroom, but I found that's where that love came forward for me. And yes, I mean, one of the greatest gifts of my life was to find that out.
Oh, that's great. Now, I think you've told us already, but I do want to ask, because I ask every guest, a story about grace. And that is certainly a story of grace. Is there something else you want to share, Kim? So, yeah.
Well, yes, I'll share the first two, and they're linked, that come to mind because I think about grace and dignity for every life, every day. When my dad found out that, when I say officially that he was dying, so cancer presented in his brain 4 years after the brain injury, and we were told, and he was told, that there wasn't even a reason to do chemotherapy at that time. So, and then he would live about 3 more months, which he did. We all went home that day, and all of us were very teary, as you can imagine. And my dad referred to this day later, saying he was actually very scared himself. But he said to us, "Don't suffer with me. I'm an incredibly lucky guy. I've done everything I wanted to do. I've had a wonderful life." And that I'll never forget. Now, my dad did die. He died in May. 3 months later, he died in May of 2000. And after his funeral, I was staying at my beloved sister Tammy's house. She's no longer with us either. We were 11 months apart. She was my person, if you know what I mean. And we'd both lost the same dad.
Mm-hmm.
And here it is. Tammy comes up to the guest room where I was, and my young daughter Caitlin was. And Caitlin got her treat, but Tammy brought me she brought me toast, beautiful toast, not the healthy kind, white bread toast with a lot of butter, and it was still warm, and a cup of tea. And she just said, "Here, sis, I think I think Dad would have wanted you to have this right now. Well, there's Grace.
Absolutely. And what a touching story of a fond memory of your sister, of course, and then your father was the overarching base of it. And what this illustrates so much is that, what your father was saying to us is don't suffer with me. I've had a great life, giving you freedom to live your own life for a short period of time, but the little thing that your sister did, and that's that little step. There are micro moments of grace, or moments of grace, and we need to, grace can be transformative, but it can be very much transactional. And what a lovely story. So Kim, you have been a wonderful guest. We could keep on going, but we have time limits here. So how can people find you?
Oh, well, can I give my email?
Absolutely. Whatever you want to share. We will put your website is kimsamuel.com.
Well, that's true. That's my personal website. I mean, about me. And then I'll give you another website, which is it's one word, if that makes sense, or in an internet way, On Belonging Book, onbelongingbook.com. And then Kim Samuel at scsc.com. That's a Samuel Center for Social Connectedness. So hopefully one of those.
Kim, it has been an honor to have you on the show today. Thank you. You have shared such wonderful, rich lessons that can make us better human beings. So I appreciate that. So with that, we're going to close out.
Thank you very much.